Before I begin, let me share a couple of little insider secrets. A lot. He's an amazing teacher and an amazing guy. One of the items of trepidation when I first began working with George was realizing that as I got up here in the pulpit, George would be sitting up here in a pew. If you think back to school, you remember having to go and give a dissertation in front of the teacher or professor that assigned you that job? Remember it?
Yes.
How about the dean of the academy? George is the dean. Unfortunately, he's not with us today. We'll talk about that during prayers. A couple of other things, kind of insider story on this, is that there are two people that I look to besides George as I'm talking up here, except for each of you, of course. Edith, who tells me to slow down. And if I don't, she takes me out to that broom closet and chats with me about it. The other is my wife. If I say something the least little bit off, I'm going to hear about it probably for the remainder of the day. So it's not as easy as you think. There's some things that are going on. Will you pray with me? Father, open our ears, Lord, and teach us to listen. Open our eyes, Lord, and let us see Jesus. We all know the story of the miracle of Jesus feeding 5,000 men with 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 little fish. Interestingly, all 4 gospel writers chose to add that event into their gospels. And they're all very, very similar. I have chosen John's version of the story. You'll find this morning's New Testament lesson on page 1655 of your pew Bibles. I am reading John 6, verses 1 through 15. Listen for God's message for you. The rhythm's not quiet. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. That's significant, that statement, that Jewish Passover feast was near, because people were on the road to Jerusalem. So there would be crowds almost by accident. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where should we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Now, Philip was from that area, would have known which merchants he could go to get things. Now, Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up, said, "Here is a small boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they all had had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. Now, after the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to the mountain by himself. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Now, of course, we all know that the principal theme of this story is that Jesus performed another miracle by multiplying the young boy's meager lunch in order to feed the 5,000 men. Now, we know that there were women and children there as well. So this miracle just doubled. I think it's significant to note that the lunch was 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. At that time, barley was the lowliest kind of grain available, and bread made from barley was used to feed servants and prisoners. The only fish available in this region were about the size of sardines. and would have been pickled, as fish could not be kept fresh in that climate. The barley loaves were probably the size of a dinner roll, and the fish the size of sardines. I find significance in the absolute lowliness of this boy's lunch. Any self-respecting Jew would have been mortified to think that anyone would be given this lunch, especially Jesus. Yet Jesus took this meager offering and turned it into a veritable feast. What I would like you now to think about is what it would be like sitting there on the banks of the Sea of Galilee, and suddenly the rabbi takes this tiny lunch and multiplies it so that everyone has more than enough to eat. You have just witnessed firsthand an astounding miracle. Up to now, you've been hearing about Jesus performing miracles, but this one happened right in front of you, right before your eyes. The wonder, the joy, the absolute feeling of elation, not to mention having a full tummy. What a day. What an experience. If you think you've experienced a life-altering event, you know those things like Kennedy assassination, 9/11, one that remains with you for life. Think about these simple people and how it affected their lives. But the witnessing of a miracle is not the only thing that occurred on this day. To start with, you watch Jesus bless the food. We always bless our food without thinking too much about it. But these people, devout Jews, may have never thought to thank God so completely before eating. A fellowship developed with Christ at this event. He shared with total strangers the food he had. A superabundance was created. These people lived meager existences and were taxed on what little they had. Suddenly, there was more than enough for everyone. Finally, everyone there experienced firsthand divine care, probably for the first time in their lives. Now, Faith did a great job of bringing us the wonder and awe experienced by this young boy. This young man knew who Jesus was and told his mother about the wonderful experience of hearing Christ, about looking into his eyes. He was already in awe just by being in his presence. Now, we are told about forgetting his own hunger as he watched blind people being able to see, deaf people could hear, and the lame being able to walk. But then Andrew was a big guy, by the way, convinced him to bring his tiny lunch of barley loaves and pickled fish to Jesus. What an experience. What a day. Now, at the end of this feasting, Jesus told his disciples to gather up all the remnants, that nothing be wasted. We don't read in any of the 4 Gospels what they did with the 12 baskets of leftovers. We could speculate for the remainder of the day about what they did with them. But my guess is that nothing was wasted, just like Jesus said. I want to read the last 2 verses of this story again. We don't often hear them with this story. They're normally not included. Starting with verse 14. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to the mountain by himself. As I say, John is the only author who adds this to the narrative. Now, in Deuteronomy 18:15, we read, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers. You must listen to him." Now, the multitude knew this passage well and drew the conclusion that they were indeed seeing this prophecy come to life right there. Jesus withdrew because he knew that the crowd would forcibly make him king. He had his disciples flee, and he too withdrew because by making him king, he would be starting a revolution against the Romans. They did not fully understand that Christ's work as Savior of the world did not involve conquering governments at that time. The author of the narrative, read so well by Faith, captured the very essence of this great lesson, this great day, this miraculous day, in the last sentence. May I read it to you again? Listen. "But you know, on the way home I got to thinking, if Jesus could do all that with just my lunch, Just think what he could do if I gave my whole life to him. Would you be willing to give up your life to Jesus? I'm kind of glad that I gave my life to Jesus. Aren't you glad too? Amen. Our second hymn is on page 129.